Good morning, everyone. It's Joshua here. A few apologies early on. I understand sound quality is not good today. It must be due to the all the shopping that's happening, so I apologize for that. Please put into the chat how you are hearing this so I can adjust accordingly. But I am having challenges. It also might be because I'm in a hotel. My name is Joshua Bixby. I'm excited to spend the next 20 minutes with you and talk about an action plan for performance. I am surprised that there are so many people today, given the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. So thank you for being here. Let's jump into this. So my goal today is for you to come out with an action plan, and let's be clear about what we're talking about here. Performance equals money, and when developing an action plan, what I highly recommend is trying to figure out what what this means for you. What is the money that matters for you? And that's something that sorry, I'm just closing my email. That's something that is really important and that you need to know about. So one of the goals here is, what does money mean to you? What is the variable? So let's talk about what that looks like. One of the things, as we talk about what that looks like, is the discussion around the fact that this is actually a cost benefit. We know that there are diminishing marginal rates of return in the web performance industry. We're well aware of that. We know that to change priorities within an organization, we have to make a compelling case, and that's what this is all about. To start this off, let's understand that as you try to improve performance and you try to lower performance, your cost goes up. So what we're trying to do here, and we also know obviously that it gets harder, what we're trying to do here is trying to make a case for where on this line do we want to end up. If our performance is quite poor today and we're not spending a lot of money on it, possibly we want to be down here. But this last 5% is very, very expensive. So what we're trying to do in building a business case is, one, upfront recognize this and try to figure out where on this line we want to end up, number one, and also how much money it's going to cost and what gain we're going to get. So this all starts with leveraging and understanding the research. And I think in looking at the research in this market, the value of looking at this research is that it allows us to understand what's compelling in terms of how performance has been presented, and we can learn something from that. The way performance is presented is very important. So let's take a look at what's happened in the past. Google did a presentation where they said 400 milliseconds mattered. Now, if you look at a video of 400 milliseconds, I'm not compelled by this. That is not compelling to me. If you look at a graph and you see how it impacts the average daily search per user, in the context of Google, when you're talking about 1/10 of a percent, 100th of a percent, this is a much more compelling graph than the video was in terms of the impact of performance. So again, as looking through the research, not only do we, capture and try to, in our action plan, we're going to want to try to capture this as a baseline so people know that all of this isn't just our speculation, but it also helps understand what's compelling. For my organization, that video wouldn't be compelling. However, a graph like this, given the context of what Google, these percentages probably aren't impressive to you, but in the context of Google are very, very impressive. 1% decrease in search for 400 millisecond delay is, something these guys work on for 6 months, for example. Let's take another example of Bing. So Bing saw that 2 seconds made a huge difference. Let's look at that from a video perspective. That's more compelling. I can see 2 seconds. I can feel why that would make a difference. If we look at it in terms of presentation, now we're talking about, I think, a more compelling presentation of these numbers. And again, in a business case, we're trying to appeal to the emotional side of these buyers and stakeholders within your organization. So, what is a 2-second delay? These bottom ones are in milliseconds. Well, I'm losing almost 5% of revenue per visitor. My satisfaction is going down by 4%. The clicks are going down by 4.5%. This is compelling to me. This is a way that I can see that makes sense to me. And again, not only does this capitalize on the research side, but it capitalizes on the presentation side. Shopzilla is another example. Shopzilla saw a 5-second difference. Well, this is just strikingly compelling. In terms of when it loads, how it's complete. More importantly, if you look at the way they've presented their data, this is a really nice graph. The numbers up top are also compelling, but that shows me, that's a nice way to present performance, especially performance gains or reduction in performance. That's compelling to me. Also, obviously, saw a 5 to 12% increase in revenue. Very compelling. AOL, this is interesting in terms of how they presented it with percentiles. So what are my average page views per visit based on load times? So this doesn't mean that you accelerate or unaccelerate a site. It just means that you have some understanding for where performance is. And it's pretty tough to make the argument that performance doesn't impact the number of page views when you look at performance in this context. Now, again, what's interesting about this curve is it really mimics the curve that we were looking at before. In the context, it obviously reversed. But does it make sense to go from here to here? I don't know. As you start climbing up the curve, though, if you could move this point to that point, this is a huge business impact. Again, how it's presented and the research, 2 factors. This is an interesting one, and again, it doesn't appeal to me in terms of my mindset, but here's an example of downloads of Firefox put over page load times, and when Firefox improved the speed of their page here from 4.97 seconds to 2.81, they saw a dramatic conversion increase. Again, another data point, an important one, but also important in the context of performance. Now, there are a number of questions streaming in, and I want to try to make this interactive. So 1, I encourage questions, and 2, I'll try to answer some at this point. One of the questions, a couple questions, and I'll sort of summarize here from Dave and Georg about the where these stats come from and how to get them. I actually have a blog where I keep a list of all of these stats. It will be listed at the end, so you can go back to the sources themselves. Another question about where the videos come from. So I will actually show that here in the presentation. So we'll actually create a video or try to create a video, or at least look at where those are created depending on timing and how many questions are there. All those videos are captured from webpagetest.org, which is a site that, for any of you, and I see a lot of recurring faces on these coffee talks, so it's nice. Welcome back, all of you. That's a site that you'll be very familiar with and understand that I spend a lot of time on. About.com, they presented it in a very text-oriented way and then had some performance numbers. Again, interesting in terms of what they're measuring here. They're measuring revenue per 1,000 pages. Again, Firefox was measuring downloads. Yahoo was measuring page views. One of the important things as I go through this research and in this section is to really try to figure out what is the performance metric that relates to the KPIs that matter for you. What's the KPI? And then we'll sort of talk about the performance metric. It depends on your business. If you're an internal business, your KPI might be productivity. It might be user satisfaction. If you're an e-commerce site, our experience is that it's revenue or it's conversion. If you're a search site, Google announced in April that search is an important, performance is an important factor in search. You might be measuring this on your organic search rankings or what Google tells you about your performance in terms of how you're doing. So very, very important numbers. Question from Jason about the Google announcement. So Google measures, I get this question a lot, so Jason, it's a good question. There's a lot of uncertainty as to how Google uses performance and what it looks like. So I've blogged about this, but let me give you the Reader's Digest. Google is using the performance numbers they gather from their toolbars installed on machines to make a decision about how fast your site is from a ranking perspective. We know that it is one of 200 variables. We do not know how important it is in the variables, but we do know from our experience in our customer base that when they have improved performance, they have increased in ranking. So as you all know, those of you in the SEO world know this is alchemy. This is not an exact science, but we have definitive examples of where we have changed one variable, which is performance, and seen increases in rankings. There are other examples that others have published on that. So what's important, though, is it's not the speed of the bots. It's the speed of the users radioing back to Google from the toolbars. So that's a very good question and something that's often misunderstood. Step 2, you got to baseline your site performance. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I've spent a lot of time in past discussions talking about different baselining tools, how to do this. There's some good webinar content and good blog content on this already. there are two sort of perspectives on this that I want to highlight here. Obviously, you're going to want to look at a couple variables. One is performance over time. So you might see a graph like this. The other thing is you might do performance in one example or multiple examples. So here you'll see one waterfall first view, waterfall repeat view, and all the stats. I want to point out a few things here, but Yang has a question that I want to address that actually kind of relates to where I'm going, which is what tools, what do I look at, what are the numbers that are important. So let me try to give you a digest version of that. I believe, and this is something that we're going to come out more strongly with in the new year, because we'll have more research. But we research continuously. We capture numbers from hundreds of millions of browser hits on our customer sites every day, or every week, I should say, if I'm talking about hundreds of millions. And we analyze that data. And I believe the most important number is when your page starts to render for your user. Now, that's not the only number, and we don't want to be myopic here, but that's very, very important. In fact, as we looked at the videos, think emotionally. When you saw things start early, maybe they didn't end early enough, but when they started early, that's hugely important. So if somebody said you can move one number for a page, I would focus on start render. Now, there are some caveats there, but that's the high level. Obviously, the fully loaded page is important, and actually more important is a number we can't capture today. And that number is, when is it actionable? When can I do something? And again, these are hard numbers to digest today. Obviously, we and others in this industry are trying to work on trying to figure out, there's a magic number here that's somewhere between 2.295 and 5.893 on this particular page. And I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it's a magical number. Somewhere between this green line and this blue line. Now, in capturing your performance, there are three things that are absolutely critical that I would highly recommend. The first thing is, what browsers do you care about? Make sure you're testing those. 2, what latency do your customers really experience you using? And make sure that when you're doing tests, you're mimicking that. 3rd, make sure that you're doing it from locations that are actually where your customers are. So that's why I really like web page test. If we go over here to web page test, we'll see an example. I'll show web page test very quickly. What I really like about web page test is I can actually have control over those things. I can come here and I can change my location. If I've got users in the East, West Coast, North America, all over the world. I can change my browser. Now, I'm limited, obviously, to IE, and that's a limitation in terms of this tool. But we find that for many customers, IE remains a dominant browser. And if I go into some of my advanced settings, I can actually change my connection speed. If all of your users are on fiber, go here. If all of your users are on DSL, go here. If you think your average user and you have more insight into them, do a custom setting. Let's say you don't think it's 1.5 megs down and it's 5 megs. You have control over all of these variables, and that's why I really like this tool. The option here, as we were talking about earlier, and I might as well kill this bird as we're doing this, is to capture video. So let's say I'll do something very quickly. Google.com from Delhi using IE7 over a FiOS connection. Let's use DSL. And I want to capture a video. I set those settings up, and I click Start Test. That's going to be obviously, it's waiting, so I'll come back to this. It's waiting behind a test, and then it's going to test. There's one test already in process right now. Let's come back to that presentation and keep going. And I'll come back to that test after, because there are a few questions from Wanda and Greg about how to do that, and that will answer that, hopefully. And I encourage you, if you're sitting here, and obviously I want you to watch the presentation, but if you have time, go do some tests, run it yourself. Important also to capture waterfalls, I find. And one of the recommendations we'll have in the action plan is to be making sure you're capturing these links and sending them around when you send around your action plan. Very, very important to have the data so that people can dig in. One of the beauties of web page test or other tools like this is they provide a large amount of data below the surface that if your technical team or others want to dig into is available for you. And we'll take a look at that when we look at that video. So when you're capturing your data, I recommend capturing something over time, because one test might show some variations. I certainly never run one test. I would recommend running 5 or 10, and because you're going to find anomalies. And I recommend both doing it over time and in an instance to get a picture of your performance. What is your baseline? What does it look like? Again, the key criteria. Make sure you're making it visual. Videos are ideal. Make it simple, but also make sure that you're capturing the key metrics and highlighting them. You have to put this into context, and there's two contexts that we're going to talk about in developing an action plan. The first context is one around research. You know, in 2001, Zona Research came out. Some of you will know this, probably a few good laughs here. Zona Research came out and said, you know, the key metric is 8 seconds times tenacity times importance times natural patience will give you the number you need to get to. Well, that's since evolved. Forrester came out sponsored by Akamai to say you have to keep your pages under 2 seconds. So everyone's trying to find a magic number. So it's important to look at the research that's gone out there, and there's a number of research studies since then. I don't put a lot of stock in this research. I think what's interesting about this research is I look at it sometimes as a Barbie standard. You know, you're trying to get a standard that no one else can achieve. That's why these are often sponsored by vendors like ours. We want you to feel insecure. I look at other things. So another thing that is available are benchmarks. So here's a Gomez retail benchmark. This response time in the retail sector is 2.3 seconds. If you look at it broken down, you can see, you know, for May, the response time ratings by site, availability, consistency. You have to be very, very careful with these benchmarks. One, these benchmarks are taken, they don't follow any of the rules that I explained for benchmarking your own sites. They're not done on real browsers. They're done on mimic browsers. They're not done from two of the rules, I should say. They're not done from any with any latency introduced at all. So this is basically how fast would J.Crew's site come back on a tier 1 data center on fiber, which is an outrageous measurement from where I sit trying to improve, you know, key metrics, key business metrics, and I think where you should sit. So the idea that J.Crew's at 0.75 seconds, do that in a real browser over DSL, and you will never get these numbers. So one thing I really caution you on is to use some of these benchmarks. They do have value. They have value in terms of availability. They have value in terms of some of the numbers, and you can sort of benchmark yourself here, but this is not the important benchmark. The important benchmark are the ones we talked about earlier. Let's go to the next step, which is you can also benchmark against competitors. I really like this view. I know people have a difference of opinion, but what I've done here, actually, let me go back to the test. The test is not working, so that's not ideal. I think we're still behind probably one slow running test. So let's go to a test that's already been run. Here's, let's just take one that's been run. You can kind of go into test history here. And let's just take one. I'm looking for one with a little dot next to it so I can, and I'm looking to not have one that is going to embarrass me. So let's look at Expedia, the French Expedia site. This basically would have been the outcome had the Google one worked. And then on the right here, you can see the video. And what I looked at before was the film strip view. So this is a film strip view, a view that I really like. It shows you, and you can have granular feel around size of the pictures and the interval. You can really get a sense for what the numbers are. So here I can see something starting to load at 4 seconds. If I want to get more granular, I can come here and do this view. It's actually 4.5 seconds. Something happens here. If I want to get down to the 10th of a second, I can come here and see, oh, look, for what really happens is at 4.5, that loads. I really like this tool, and I really like this view. If I want to create a video, I just click Create Video. So that's the way that works, and I apologize for that not working. When you do things in live, as you all know, these things change. So what I like about this view is this actually stacks up that film strip view for multiple competitors at once. So if you're in this market, and these are your two main competitors, and you're this guy, this is not a good view. And I find competitive views from a benchmarking and action plan to actually be more powerful than other things that I'm seeing. So not only is this view successful, I often start with a customer and say, okay, let's build an action plan. Which one are you? If you're this one, I'm feeling good about you. If you're this one, well, and this guy's your biggest competitor, that's really not good, and look over here. So here's an example of the other form of competitive overview that I spend a lot of time on is videos. This is a video. I often put it into slow motion because I think that that's a successful way to look at this. And I put these in slow motion. These are the three biggest competitors in this particular market. You obviously want to be this person. Secondly, you're going to want to be this group. And thirdly, obviously, over here. And this is the customer that wants, this is the customer that if you're this person, this is a very motivating part of the action plan. In fact, I find this alone to be one of the most motivating action plans. I apologize for the gun reference, but it was actually the latest one that I had on my desktop. So very interesting in terms of visual impact in developing an action plan. So so the benchmarks, I think, are less valuable. Use your competitors and use the ones that your marketers care about. I think video is by far the most powerful element here, and you really need to leverage this in an action plan. Again, coming back to that original diagram, how far do you go? I think that is one of the strongest indicators of how far to go. Now, I don't like the idea of just go to, just go to your worst competitor. I think most of you want to be better, and given the performance impact we saw up there, I think that there's a lot of compelling evidence to get better. But if you're worse, you have to get at least somewhere. Last part of an action plan is to analyze the market. So let's say you're going to take an action here. It's not good enough to just benchmark. You have to actually try to outline what the market looks like. And here's a helpful way, I think, to look at it. So the first difference here is buy versus build. Are you going to solve this by doing it yourself, or are you going to buy something to solve it? Obviously, my company's on the buy side. I have a bias there, but you have to make that choice. If you're going to build, there are a number of other options here. I want to focus on the buying option. If you're going to buy, you need to make a decision about whether you have a front-end or a back-end problem. That's actually quite an easy decision. What you need to do is look at your waterfall and make a decision. Let's go back to the waterfall we had here. I'll just go back to that waterfall. Let's take a look at this page, and let's make that decision really quickly for this Expedia site. Back-end problem is the number from here to this first, when the second item starts running. This page takes 9.6 seconds. The front end is about 1.7 seconds. It's about 16, 15% of the problem. I'd characterize this as a site where it would be nice to improve the back end, but the vast majority of the site is a front end problem. So that's how you would distinguish. Just look at the first line. If this first line came out to here, and then the site loaded down here, site's back end problem was 8 seconds and everything loaded in 1, you got a back end problem and you have a different problem to solve. Obviously, sometimes you have both. If you do have a front end problem, you need to look at there are two different market segments that can help you in this. There's the delivery market and there's the transformation market. The delivery market is really load balancers and CDNs. So the next question I would ask yourself, do you have a load balancer, or are you using the techniques that load balancers would give you, ADCs or whatever the term is? Do you have a CDN, and if so, what kind and what's your benefit? So those are the two questions on the delivery market that you need to look at. If you're looking at the transformation market, you need to really look at, I think, this market, because of this is obviously where we sit, but this market is less mature, and your options here are, the real question here, I think, is where should this be implemented? Do you want something on the server? Do you want something in the network? Do you want to just subscribe to a service? So at the end of all of this, and I know I'm going over time, and there are a lot of questions which I'm not getting to, so I apologize, and some feedback that the voice is not great, so I apologize for that. The next step is to put it all together. I find sending videos out as standalone pieces is one of the most important motivators in terms of an action plan to start getting action, but also to set baselines. Send it out. Make sure you link back to the results. Prioritize. You need to make a fundamental decision about how much you're going to build and how much you're going to buy. And then you need to make the list short if you're going to do it yourself, and start hacking away at those options. There are a lot of questions left, so I'm going to answer a couple of them, and then I'm going to get back to you all individually after, because I know that we're sort of at the end. So, question from John about the transformation market and who the players are and what it looks like. Don't have time to get into that, but I think the one really strong consideration in the transformation market, because of its immaturity, and again, I'm in this market, is when you're looking at outsourcing performance optimization, the most important thing in this market is to see who the customers are, talk to customers, make sure they're enterprise customers running lots of data, and that's the key. Make sure that this is in the real world and it's having real value. So that's the one thing, again, in any market that's maturing, it's all about the customers. So that's my one recommendation of if nothing else. Cable has a question about Gomez and Keynote, Webmetrics, others. We are partners with all those companies, so don't hear what I'm saying as throw out Keynote, throw out Gomez. But I highly recommend that you push these organizations to hit the key elements. Real browsers, real network connections, real locations. The three keys. They actually do quite well on locations, but usually they're sitting in tier 1 data centers with browsers that aren't real and without any latency. Now, that's great for availability. If you're just trying to figure out if your site's up, that's excellent. If you're trying to figure out how to make your customers do what you want and relate to your performance KPIs, it's certainly not. Last question I'm going to take here is from Kelly, and then, again, all of the others I will get back to you in person. Kelly asks about what else should be included in the action plan. So her comment comes from, my developers are asking for waterfall analysis. They're the team's asking for a waterfall analysis. They're asking for very specific, so a lot of specifics. So obviously, if you come from a culture where specifics are important and your success is measured by how large your document is, then you have to do that work. My recommendation has always been to keep your baseline simple, to keep your competitive baseline simple, to keep your action plan simple. That's the school that I come from and that I think requires more action. If you need to go to that next level and you need to actually see all of the detail, one of the things I highly recommend is to use tools like Web Page Test, YSlow, HTTP Watch to capture that data and to include it. But and then the analysis part obviously requires expertise. So if any of you have those questions, I'd be happy to help. Running up against the end of time, I wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. I spend a lot of my evenings and weekends thinking about these problems and blogging on web performance today, so I really encourage you to feed back into that, topics that you'd like to hear, and I love your comments and feedback. I will get back to all of the questions. I apologize to everyone that that asked questions that I couldn't get back to, but I will certainly make it a priority today to do that. Have a happy, safe Thanksgiving.